Isle of Jura is a relaxed, play at your own pace, wholesome fishing game primarily that sees you play as Alex, who travels to the Isle of Jura to finish off her biology project. It's implied that she needs specimens, but she doesn't kill anything, so don't worry. Although she does sell off all of her fish that she collects to the shop, which is a restaurant. And I was like, you've just helped the economy. So yeah, anyway, you end up at the Isle of Jura. Sorry, side station there. Play as Alex and you wander around this small island collecting fish. There's over 50 to collect, and they could be anything from crabs to minnows to newts and frogs, all the way up to quite chunky fish like trout and haddock and so on. And when you catch them, Alex turns to the camera and is like, ta-da! And then you get the name of the fish and the weight of the fish. Everything is sellable. You then use that cash to then buy upgrades to your equipment. But you only ever have two things going at once. One's the fishing net and one's a rod. And so you need to kind of be clear that you're kind of done or finished with one rod before you move on to the next one, because it limits and changes where you can fish depending on the equipment that you have. And I'll circle back to that later because it was a point of contention for me. Isle of Jura is small. It's budget, but I really like the look and feel of most of what's going on here. The island looks nice. I'm a sucker for low poly graphics, so that all works well with me. Alex looks good as a character too. Everyone else looks horrific and horrifying, especially the lady at the shop where you sell your fish. She looks horrifying, and there's a horror movie in there somewhere. But outside of that, the best thing about this is the foam in the water and the waves of how everything kind of laps around. I did find that quite relaxing and tranquil. And there's always a background of water going around. No real sound effects, and there's a small kind of weird, like ambient guitar loop going around, but it fades in and out and doesn't really have too much of a tune, so I didn't pay much attention to it. The main gameplay here, though, is around 4 different mini-games. And I have to say that it's not enough to sustain a game like this long term. And it's all tied to the trigger buttons as well, which I found odd from a control scheme. Basically, you select your object that you're going to, or your equipment, sorry, and then you place Alex wherever she can be. So it might be that if you've got the fishing net, you squat in the water and then you wait for a splash. And then the UI comes up on the screen and it's like a bounce back and forth line, and you have to just tap the trigger button when it's in the green zone. When you then upgrade to a rod, you then have the ability to decide where you're going to throw it, and depending on the... In my head, it was depending on the colours of the water, was depending on where you wanted to kind of get things to get certain types of animals. I don't even know if Isle of Jura was really that in depth, but in my head, it seemed to be how this game worked. And so you'd throw out your... line with the right trigger, and then you'd wait for the bob to go under. As soon as you did that, you'd press and hold the right trigger down and then slowly let go and try and keep the meter from hitting too high up to the top for red or drop out the bottom for green. And eventually the fish would come towards you. Now those two were fine, but then when I got to fly fishing, this seemed to have some kind of rhythmic thing around ripples in the water. And I have to say it made no sense, it felt completely random, and I was really put off by this specific game mechanic. And what made it even worse is that when you upgraded to the fly fishing rod, it got rid of your previous rod and you couldn't then go fishing in the normal sea, which I was actually finding quite nice and enjoyable to try and collect everything as I was going. So I thought, this is annoying and a pain. And essentially my enjoyment of this game stopped dead at this mini game because it just felt random. It also exasperated a few of the issues with the game. Firstly, the control scheme is a little bit sensitive. So if you're trying to back yourself out of, say if you've launched something in the wrong place and you're not getting that rhythm right, or you're in the wrong location, you then have to kind of go through the motions of failing, and then eventually it will give you control back. But if you do catch something, Alex poses to it, to the camera, for about 10 seconds, and you have no control of being able to get anything forward. So you're wasting 10 seconds there. You're also wasting time whilst you wait for the fish to bite. And then the various different animations are all really long, like 10 seconds to 15 seconds each. And so it feels like you're watching really slow animation, waiting for that chance to then press the trigger button at the right time and hope for the best. That it's going to work for you. And so, a bit annoying. The tutorials for some of these fishing games also didn't work for me. I failed 2 of them, yet it still was like, oh, it's all fine, off you go. And I was like, that's no good. And then the other thing that annoyed me as well is that the camera is fixed. And it's fixed to a point where it looks from the outside of the island in. So you spend half of your time running towards the camera and bashing into things. And because the Isle of Jura is set up in a way that means that you have to go the long way round everything, it is the most least efficient way to build an island these residents have ever done. And I'm assuming it's to pad gameplay time again, because everything else that's really long animation wise seems to be pointing that direction. I just was like, you've spent so much time making these nice graphics and the island looks lovely. Let me spin the camera around so I can see it. And quite often it would be that I was fishing, and especially when it come to this rhythmic thing where you had to look out for ripples in the water, sometimes the camera wouldn't actually have the bob in view, or I'd have like a giant tree in front of it or part of a bridge. And I was like, this is just... I feel like I'm fighting this game, and it's supposed to be relaxing and cute. With that all aside, those 4 mini games, because then you've got deep weight fishing coming afterwards with a similar evil, you have very little to sustain several hours of gameplay. And whilst it's fine from a collectathon perspective, I didn't necessarily feel compelled to finish Alex's biology project. Less so Collector 100% of the fish directory and random artifacts that you can fish or collect or find on the beach as you go through the game as well. Couldn't be bothered with that either. So yeah, not a strong recommendation for me. I do think there is an audience for this game though, just not me, I'm afraid. So written review will be over on highplanegames.com. Hope that was informative. If you've got questions, leave them down below. Cheers. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/Higher Plane Network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.